My name is Joe Scarnecchia with Mack Trucks. I've been around the Mack brand now about 41 years, so I've seen a lot of changes. Just a quick background on myself. I was at a Mack dealership for 17 years. Then I went with Mack Corporate 25 years ago as a district service manager. Then I went into the powertrain end of it, and it seems like lately, wherever they want me, that's where I'm going to. So that's where we are. What I'm going to cover today is we're going to talk about greenhouse gas 17, the changes with the engine on the Mack side. We'll talk about the M drive, and we'll also do we'll do a quick view of the new interior on the Granite. We introduced a new truck called the Anthem 2 weeks ago, and the good thing is the new dash and new interior goes over to the Granite and also the Pinnacle. We're going to talk about the engine. We'll talk about the transmission. First, I want to go into after treatments. How many guys out there today are having issues with regens? No, I've never heard of that. Have you had much issues since we've gone to SCR? Has that cut back some? Cut back quite a bit. You're still having issues. That's the sidebar we need to look at. If it's on a Mack, if it's somebody else, we can still look at it. But keep in mind, we went from what we called a DPF. We went from the one-box design, from the two-piece design, which are DPF and SCR, and now we've gone to a one-box. The changes with the one box as we get into it is the material that we're using inside of here as the SCR. Has anybody seen this yet in any of their trucks, the one box design? So along with that one box design, anytime you see a one box on your truck, it also has common rail fuel system. And it also has the new wave piston design. So the one box, nothing changes. You still have a diesel oxidation catalyst. You still have your SCR catalyst, you still have your filter in there. The difference is the material that is now inside of your SCR catalyst, we went from an iron Z-Lite to a copper Z-Lite. The copper Z-Lite is more efficient, it puts out more heat. The good thing is, it will clean everything upstream, and I'll go into the regen processes there. It did lighten it up 17 pounds. It also gave us a lot more frame space. Here's where we talk about the difference in the material. Today, there are two regens that take place. You have a sulfur regen. Let me back up. You have a DPF regen for soot. That's burning off your soot in your DPF, which is in your DPF canister. After that, we have has anybody heard of crystallization sublimation? Where you have to burn the crystallization off. How many of you guys have seen a broken flex pipe and seen all that white build up around there? That's crystallization from the DEF. The other regen that will take place now, and there's a plus to this, is when we went to copper Z-Lite. Copper Z-Lite, as it does a regen, it will do it automatically as long as it has enough time and enough heat to do it. What it will do, the catalyst absorbs the sulfur in there. So you need to burn that sulfur off. So now the driver will see on his display that a regen, if it needs to take place, we're not going to tell him what regen needs to take place, but he will know that he needs to do one. So the sulfur regen is driven strictly off of fuel used. Critical that you remember that as you receive these newer trucks. If it has to do a sulfur regen, and for some reason this guy's only traveling 3 or 4 miles and not running up and down the highway, and he has to do a manual regen. The sulfur regen is driven by, how many guys are running 11 liters or 13 liters out there? Mostly 11 or 13 or 13? On the 13-liter engine, the sulfur regen is strictly driven by gallons of fuels used. So at 1,000 gallons of fuel, the system is going to try to automatically do a regen on its own. If it can't do a regen on its own, at 1,100 gallons of fuel, it's going to give you a warning that you need to do a regen. It's going to be a service regen if you go through 1,350 gallons of fuel before you do a regen. So keep in mind as you go through those regens, you don't have to panic. Between 1,000 gallons and 1,350, another 350 gallons of fuel is what, maybe another week and a half, or 2 weeks with you guys? We need to just educate the drivers when these warnings come up on the dash. The good thing about the sulfur regen is it runs at a higher temperature and it runs for a longer time. So all that crystallization and soot regen that needs to take place, it cleans that all out also when it's doing it. So just keep that in mind. So today, what we've seen in our testing, if you're running an SCR truck today, you're running DEF in there. If you're not seeing an issue today, you're not going to see an issue here. But if you're in extreme short applications where you give that system no time to do a regen, you could run into this. So just keep that in mind. So you see where we had the two-piece DPF SCR, now even with an axle back, this is axle forward here, you have back of cab clear. With the axle back, you can use different configurations. It tucks everything back up underneath there. So the real secret to this DPF, the SCR, the whole unit, DPF SCR, is in order for a regen to take place, a crystallization to take place, a sulfur to take place, we need heat. So what we do with this, as the exhaust comes into the DPF, it will go through the oxidation catalyst, go through the filter, and then it comes down and goes through the SCR catalyst. We have heat coming inside, and instead of running a straight pipe out of here and exiting, we fill that whole chamber up with that exhaust coming out. So as the heat comes out of here, it fills this whole chamber with heat. So you have heat internally and heat externally, heating that up. On a axle back chassis, which most of yours are probably axle forward, which is really nice because axle forward, with this setup here, if you turn the tire to the left, turn the wheels to the left, and you take that guard off, the splash guard off the front, you can pull that filter out the front of there now. Now, how are you guys changing your filters? You have a maintenance setup for changing the filters or cleaning them? Because you know that that's been extended also with SCR. Or do you change them when you have an issue? We talk about integrated powertrain. Mack Trucks has been doing it since the mid-60s when we introduced the Maxidine engine. But we've been in business 117 years. So we have a lot of experience on engine, transmission, rear end. So greenhouse gas 17, let's talk about this briefly. We all know about it. The good thing about greenhouse gas 17 is because of less EGR in cylinder, more in-cylinder heat, treating with the copper Z-Lite now, we have reduced the soot by 90% coming out of there. And fuel economy, we're seeing about a 3% increase in fuel economy. So as we look at it, we have the MP7, the MP8, and that's strictly highway. Don't let anybody on the sales end of it, unless you're running long distance, try to sell you turbo compounding. The other change with the engine is the common rail fuel system. The common rail fuel system, if you've dealt with it in the past, you've always had a high pressure fuel pump. We are not using a high pressure fuel pump. We're using a low pressure fuel pump, the pump that's been on there since the introduction of the engine. And what we're doing is on the injectors, 3 of the injectors, number 2, 4, and 6, when they're not pumping fuel into the cylinder, they are creating pressure and filling pressure in that common rail. So we are using a low pressure pump. We're creating high pressure by using a unit pump or the injector there. The couple things that are really nice about the common rail, it's a lot quieter, fuel economy is better, the performance is better. We can now do multiple injections. This is a patent design on this piston with the Mack Powertrain down in Hagerstown. We call it the wave piston. So the best way is we know when we went to EGR in 2002, we know we all suffered with performance, fuel economy, and all the heat that we put underneath the hood of those trucks. The good thing about this wave piston, in order to get better fuel economy, performance, we need more heat in that cylinder when that injector fires. So that wave piston, if you can picture each one of those nozzles spraying, that nozzle from that injector will go in each one of those little pockets in that piston. And how do you create more heat? The more oxygen we can get in that cylinder, the better off we are. So as we go through that, you can see down here, this is a standard piston. You can see the oxygen flow. If you look at this new piston design, it fills that whole chamber up. And we're seeing just with that piston alone, about a 2% increase in fuel economy. Here's one here is the assembled camshaft. When I say assembled camshaft, basically they take a hollow tube and each one of those lobes are pressed onto that tube. And then the final machining is done. A couple reasons for that. It makes it lighter is a small portion of it, but the biggest portion of why we've gone to this assembled camshaft is the material that's in this tube is a different material than those lobes need to be. They need to be heat treated at different levels. The process of heat treating, the materials we use, we can now use what material is best for where we're using it at. So that's why the camshaft is assembled. Each one of those lobes are pressed on. The other is two-piece valve cover. We've gone to a two-piece valve cover. I keep hitting the wrong button here. The two-piece valve cover is a spacer in between the valve cover and the head. And what that allows to do is when they pull that valve cover off there, whether in place an injector, do a valve adjustment, all the electronics, all that pass-through stuff, you don't disturb that. Just leave that in there. It cuts down on noise. It also reduces some oil leaks in it also. And if any of you guys do your own valve adjustments in here, anybody you do, and if you've done them on the Macks in the past, the biggest complaint we had was the shims that you had to use, the shims to adjust the valves with. Everything is back to static adjustment now. No more shims in there at all. And like I say, we'll do questions and answers after we get done here. On the M-Drive transmission, I understand that the sister company yesterday spoke on the I-Shift. Keep in mind, there's the I-Shift and the M-Drive. They're similar as parts go, but they're programmed totally different from each other. In this case here, I was talking to Jeff a little bit earlier about whether you guys would ever use a 14-speed. 14-speed is 32-to-1 reduction, and it's more for pouring like curbs for concrete and that. And Jeff was saying there's some situations you could get into where you have to creep. And also, and I keep referring to Jeff because I had some conversation with him. On paving, how many of you guys are doing paving with your trucks out there? You guys are doing paving? Paving. One of the biggest complaints we had with the M-Drive was in order to go from neutral into drive, you had to put your foot on the brake to put it in drive. And the guy pushing paver didn't like that. So now you can order what they call paver assist. He can go right into drive without having to put his foot on the brake. So 32-to-1 is a pretty good reduction on there. And as we look at this, keep in mind when you're speccing the truck, really watch what you're doing with the truck because at 32-to-1, it's creeping, and the next ratio up from that is 17-to-1. You're not going to shift between 32-to-1 and 17-to-1. The super creeper gear is a super creeper gear. Now with a 13-speed, you can shift between the what we call creeper 1 and first gear on it. I know the problem we had, you had the older guys that says, you know what, I don't want one of those, I like to shift. But once they're in there for a couple weeks, they don't want to go back to the manual transmission again. So the heavy-duty M-Drive is a heavy-duty transmission. It does have a more robust synchronizer in it. It has different hardening on the gears. So even if you're running just a 12-speed today, make sure in your application you're ordering a heavy-duty no matter what you do. We're talking about the ratios here real quick. So you're at 32-to-1, and with the overdrive, it's a 19-to-1. And this is on the 14-speed. The 13-speed is 17-to-1. So it will shift between that. I assume everybody in here has the performance button on the pad. They have to shift them back and forth. So that's changing a little bit. The one thing you're going to see change on a new cab is this max engine brake button now moves up to the stock on the steering column. We move a lot up to there, so the driver has it right at his fingertips. Does everybody understand what the manual button is for here? That's strictly for holding the gear that you're in. One thing I need to really caution you on the performance button. There's 3 settings for that performance button. The one setting is it's on auto from the factory, which means it will go into performance mode if you push it, and it will stay in performance for about 3 to 5 minutes after it determines it no longer needs it and will go back to economy. If it's programmed in a manual mode and he pushes that performance button, it will stay in performance till he pushes it and comes out of that or cycles a key. So we want to make sure where they're programmed at. And the other option is you can disable it completely. I'm not going to get it, this whole presentation, to save some on time, I'm not going to get completely into the operation of it, but this is all going to be available for you out there, and you can follow up on that. We do. But you guys are all running 12 speeds today, no 13 or 14s yet? And you're finding that the 12 speed is low enough for you guys? Or maybe with the paver you might have to get a little bit lower? And the good thing about going with the 13 speed, I know you guys are concerned about fuel economy, but performance is probably your #1 issue. With the 13 speed, it gives you that low enough reduction to where at least you can get the truck going and take advantage of a little bit faster ratio on the back end to get the RPM down and get a little bit better fuel economy. And this is the auto mode. This is for the, well, this is all on the shifting. I think they talked about the power launch yesterday to where you can actually hold the button in, bring your RPMs up, release the button, and then the clutch will engage. And it was to break the tires loose, basically. And one thing we were talking about, please, if you're towing these trucks, make sure you pull the drive lines out of them. Pull the drive lines out of them and make sure the back tires are off the ground. And I need to caution you, and I don't know how many drivers will read the manuals or what your process is, there is alternative towing that you can tow them even with the drive line in, but you have to have 110 pounds air pressure, you have to have at least 10 volts, you have to be moving at a certain speed. Do you want to rely on somebody making sure all that's in place? Because you don't want to burn the transmission up. And the module, we did have the transmission module. All those controls are now located in the bodybuilder's module. And what that does, it gives us a lot more ability to change some of the features in there in special programming. PTOs, is PTOs an issue with you guys? Clearing, how many guys are having to move above 6 or 8 mile an hour with the PTO engaged? Are you spreading or anything like that? The only time I've ran into is on some water trucks where they need to run faster. If you have to run at faster speeds than 6 to 8 mile an hour, you're really going to have to look at the back rear engine PTO off the back of the engine. Because keep in mind, this is a manual transmission, and that clutch has to be engaged for it to start running the hydraulics on it. So you have the option of rear engine PTO, and one of the states out here was involved with actually changing the angle of the engine. You were involved with it, to where they actually were able to get a rear engine PTO in here. Did you guys go to that? Yes. Worked out? And what's nice that it's independent from the clutch. You can run it anytime, as long as the engine's running, you run the PTO. And this talks about the moving. And just real quick, if you don't have anything else, write down this number here. This is the bodybuilders, or you can go to www.macktrucks.com and go to the bodybuilders. And these guys are out there for you guys. I don't know if you used them in the past. It's a whole bodybuilders group that was formed about 4 years ago. So you can go to them directly and get information. So I just want to show you real quick. 2 weeks ago, we introduced a new Anthem. That is the new highway truck. The good thing with you guys running the Granite, more the vocational end of it, the new dash, the new interior, all came across to the new. 5 minutes? Okay. So this is basically what you're looking at. Totally different than what you've seen. And we also gave a little bit more room for the guys that need a little bit of belly room there. And I'm just going to flash through these real quick. But that's a new dash that you'll be looking at. And all the lights, and we talked about those controls for the engine brake. Those are all moved up to the stalks on the steering column now. And easy access to the back of the engine and also to the floor panels and that.
Joe?
Thanks, guys.
So, Henry, if you want to come on up.
The preceding video was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found at tsp2.org. That's tsp2.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.